In the vast cold of the Orion expanse, where stars burned silently and empires fought for dominion, a single name whispered through calm channels and war briefings alike. It was not the name of a fleet or a general, but of a solitary human, the last of their kind, who had slipped through the claws of extinction and turned survival into defiance. Entire systems had been burned clean of humanity 2 generations before, yet one remained. The Council of the Triarch Dominion had grown weary of the rumor, the myth, the shadow who kept undoing their operations in the outer sectors. To them, it was an embarrassment that had lasted too long, and humiliation was a poison no empire tolerated. In their chambers of black stone and cold light, the council convened. Arguments were sharp, edged with arrogance. A lone human was not a threat, they claimed, merely a pest magnified by exaggerated reports. But one fact broke their pride. Entire convoys had vanished, research stations silenced, planetary garrisons reduced to smoldering wreckage. The pattern was clear. Somewhere, hidden among drifting ice fields and broken moons, that human was striking again and again, a knife cutting wounds they could not cauterize. With irritation more than fear, they decreed an overwhelming response. 50 warships, enough to subdue a frontier world, were dispatched with one purpose: to capture the last human alive. They called it justice, though it reeked of desperation. Far from their council halls, in the shadow of a fractured moon orbiting a dead world, the human listened. The message reached them not by intercepted transmission, but by design. They had learned long ago that arrogance always left a trail. The Dominion broadcast their intent, confident enough to let rumor precede them. To the human, it was no threat. It was an invitation. Their name had been forgotten in most records. Once they were a soldier, conscripted into a war humanity was never meant to win. Now, they were something else entirely, an amalgam of instinct, scarred flesh, and cunning sharpened by solitude. Their vessel was no battleship, but a relic salvaged from forgotten wrecks, its bones grafted with stolen alien technology. It looked like a derelict drifting through void, but its core pulsed with modifications invisible to scanners. Inside its narrow corridors, the human moved with purpose, fingers brushing across consoles that bore mismatched keys from half a dozen species. Each piece of tech told a story of raids survived, victories stolen, and enemies bested. There was no crew, no companions, only the quiet hum of machinery and the whisper of thoughts that had long since learned silence was safer than memory. Yet beneath that silence burned something fierce, a refusal to bow, to disappear as the Dominion had commanded. The human was not merely surviving, they were fighting, and every skirmish was a reminder that the purge had failed. The council believed they were sending hunters. In truth, they had dispatched prey. The fleet's departure was a spectacle of power, 50 ships emerging from hyperspace lanes in formation, their hulls gleaming with banners of authority. Commanders exchanged smug transmissions, soldiers sharpened their blades and calibrated their weapons. They joked that it would be over in hours. To them, a human was fragile, slow, bound by limitations they had surpassed eons ago. Their greatest mistake was believing strength was measured by numbers alone. The humans studied their approach in silence, charting trajectories and timing hyperlane jumps with precise calculation. The Dominion fleet advanced like a tide, inevitable and broad, but tides were predictable. Patterns could be bent, twisted, broken. Already the human envisioned how they would peel the formation apart, not with brute force, but with patience and precision. Their mind was a battlefield long before the first shot was ever fired. Alone on the command deck, they let their gaze linger on the stars ahead. Somewhere beyond, 50 ships closed in, carrying the weight of an empire's arrogance. The human's expression was not fear but focus, calm as if this confrontation had been inevitable since the day they crawled from the ashes of their world. Perhaps it had. Destiny, if such a thing still existed, often disguised itself as inevitability. Still, they allowed themselves one quiet breath, a brief acknowledgement of the odds arrayed against them. 50 ships against one. Entire legions against a solitary survivor. To any rational being, it was hopeless. Yet rationality had been abandoned the day humanity burned. What remained was will, and will could turn hopelessness into a weapon sharper than any blade. The fleet entered the system where the human waited, unaware that their target already knew every angle of their approach. On one of the larger Dominion ships, the admiral stood at the center of a glowing tactical display, his many eyes scanning symbols that represented strength and certainty. He told his officers there was no need for caution. The human would be cornered, captured, and paraded before the galaxy as a symbol of Dominion supremacy. Across the void, hidden in the dark embrace of shattered rock, the human leaned against the cold frame of their ship and listened to the hum of engines preparing for war. Their hand hovered over a control etched with scratches from years of battles survived. When they spoke, it was only to themselves, a whisper meant for no ear but their own. 50 ships for one. Their lips curved into something that was neither smile nor sneer, but a promise. They'll need more. And as the first echoes of the Dominion fleet rippled across the void, the human ship came alive, a ghost rising from shadows, ready to turn the hunters into prey. The first Dominion scouts broke formation as they entered the debris field, their engines flaring pale blue against the jagged silhouettes of fractured moons. Dust and rock drifted endlessly, concealing shadows where a predator might wait. The admiral's voice thundered across the fleet's comms, issuing precise coordinates, demanding caution without betraying the arrogance beneath his tone. To him, this was no battle but a chore, a cleanup of the galaxy's last stain. His officers saluted and obeyed, unaware that the very silence of the expanse was an omen. From the fractured rocks, a single vessel stirred. It moved like a phantom, thrusters barely breathing, its hull disguised by the reflective shards surrounding it. The human watched the scouts approach through a screen of static-filled displays, every flicker of data processed not by artificial intelligence, but by intuition honed through years of survival. One ship broke too far from the others. The human's hand moved across mismatched controls, activating a sequence that had been prepared days before. A faint pulse rippled through the void, invisible to Dominion eyes, but the asteroid nearest the scout flared with sudden light. Mines stitched from scavenged ordnance detonated in a chain reaction, tearing through the first destroyer's hull before its sensors even registered danger. The explosion painted the debris field in fire, shards of glowing metal scattering into space. The Dominion fleet roared to life. Sirens howled through their ships, and commanders shouted orders, but it was already too late. Before the shock faded, the human's vessel darted from cover, striking with surgical precision. A hacking burst scrambled the second scout's guidance systems, leaving it adrift and colliding with a nearby fragment of shattered moon. Silence followed, heavier than the explosions themselves, as if the fleet suddenly realized the prey they hunted had just tasted first blood. Panic spread in whispers across the comm lines. Soldiers who had laughed hours earlier now exchanged nervous glances. 50 ships had been sent, yet already 2 were gone, erased as though they had never existed. The admiral silenced his crew with a guttural roar, reminding them of their overwhelming numbers. Fear was a weakness, and the Dominion did not allow weakness. But even as he spoke, unease twisted in his stomach. No battle plan had included the possibility of loss this early. Meanwhile, the human withdrew once more into the labyrinth of stone, their ship blending back into the debris. They had not lingered to gloat. Every move was measured, every strike calculated to sow doubt. The war was not one of numbers but of perception, and perception was already shifting. Within the human's vessel, the dim glow of consoles reflected in their eyes as they studied the fleet's adjusted formation. The Dominion was tightening its ranks, clustering ships together for protection. To any strategist, it was a sound maneuver. To the human, it was a gift. Dense formations meant predictable paths, and predictability was a weakness waiting to be exploited. Their lips parted in a murmur, almost a prayer but edged in defiance. "You'll box yourselves in." The second wave came with fury. A cluster of 5 warships swept into the field, weapons primed, scanning relentlessly. They expected to flush out a desperate fugitive. Instead, they found silence. One ship drifted too close to a cratered rock, unaware that the human had tethered it with invisible threads of code weeks earlier. At a whispered command, the rock ignited. Inside it, an ancient Dominion engine had been repurposed into a bomb. The explosion tore through the closest vessel, fragments piercing the hulls of two others. By the time alarms screamed again, the human was gone, vanishing into the black like smoke dispersing in wind. The fleet reeled, for more ships were lost, and the whispers grew louder, now tinged with dread. Some soldiers muttered of legends, of humans who once fought with fury unmatched, of survivors who became nightmares in the dark. Others dismissed it, clinging to the Admiral's voice as their last anchor. The Admiral himself paced his deck, fury boiling beneath the surface. He had studied countless campaigns, defeated countless enemies, yet here he found himself outmaneuvered by one. Every order he gave was met not with triumph but loss. For the first time, he understood the Council's mistake. They had underestimated the will of a species that refused to vanish. Across the gulf of space, the human listened to intercepted comms, their expression unreadable. They did not smile at the fear they heard, nor revel in destruction. To them, each strike was necessity, a step toward survival. Yet deep inside, there was satisfaction, not in killing, but in proving that humanity's spirit had not been extinguished. With every destroyed ship, they carved a message into the void. Extinction was not submission. The Dominion regrouped once more, pulling ships into defensive lines, deploying drones to patrol the debris. Their movements grew cautious, deliberate, no longer fueled by arrogance, but by the creeping edge of fear. The Admiral's speeches grew harsher, his voice louder, but his eyes betrayed the truth. Doubt was seeping in. The human, hidden among the ruins, prepared the next step. A series of charges waited, connected by a lattice of signals only they understood. With one command, the field could become a storm, and yet they waited. Patience was the weapon the Dominion did not possess. Let them grow anxious, let them search, let their fear consume them before the fire did. Hours stretched. The fleet moved like a beast with too many heads, snapping at shadows. Soldiers whispered of ghosts, of death cloaked in silence. The Admiral barked at them to remember their superiority, but even he could not ignore the empty spaces where ships had once flown. Finally, a new voice cut through the Dominion channels. It was not one of their own. The human's transmission slipped past encryption, clear and sharp, carrying words like knives. 50 ships for one human, the voice said, calm and steady. Already you've lost more than you'll admit. Do you still believe this is a hunt? The message repeated across every channel, a cruel echo none could silence. Fear thickened, and silence fell heavier than gunfire. For the first time, the fleet began to understand the truth. They were not chasing a fugitive. They were prey caught in a trap woven long before they arrived. The human ended the transmission with no laughter, no mockery, only quiet certainty. Then they vanished from the channels, leaving the fleet with the weight of words they could not unhear. The Admiral clenched his fists, his gaze locked on the shifting debris where the phantom ship hid. His pride demanded blood, his duty demanded victory, yet doubt gnawed at the edges of his resolve. Still, he swore vengeance. With teeth bared and eyes alight, he whispered a vow to the silence around him. You will not escape me. But deep in the void, the human had already decided. Escape was never the plan. The war had only just begun. The void outside the Dominion fleet was littered with burning husks, the remnants of ships that had once carried certainty and arrogance. Fire smoldered in silence, their wreckage drifting through the debris field like tombstones in a graveyard no one would visit. The Admiral stood at the center of his command deck, eyes narrowing at the sight of fractured hulls and scattered crew pods. Already, whispers spread across the fleet. Some officers spoke of sabotage, others of supernatural skill, but the truth pressed harder with each hour. One human had undone them, not through brute force, but through a ruthless understanding of war itself. Far from their fleet, the humans sat in the dim glow of mismatched consoles, hands steady over a ship that hummed with life though it should have been long dead. Their eyes did not leave the tactical display, a swarm of red markers representing the Dominion fleet's slow adjustments. They saw the hesitation in those movements, the way formations had grown tighter, the way patrol routes overlapped as fear bled into strategy. These were not the actions of hunters. They were the steps of prey uncertain where death would strike next. But beneath the calm exterior, memories stirred. The human had not always been this ghost in the dark. Once, they were a soldier in the ranks of humanity's last stand, when Earth's skies burned and colonies fell one after another to Dominion fleets. They had watched cities consumed by fire, families torn from one another, entire worlds silenced beneath alien boots. In those days, they were no legend, only a desperate fighter clinging to survival in wars humanity had already lost. It was in loss that they found clarity. When the Dominion sought to erase their species, the human learned that extinction was not inevitable, not so long as one still breathed. They remembered the experiments, the enhancements forced upon them in humanity's final hours. Cybernetics grafted into bone, neural interfaces that burned the mind until it either adapted or broke. Many had not survived. They had. The pain had been searing, but in that pain they gained something the Dominion never accounted for, a soldier who could think faster, adapt sharper, and endure longer than flesh alone would allow. They had become a weapon, not through design but through necessity, one that carried the weight of an entire species' extinction on their shoulders. The ship they now commanded was no miracle of engineering but a monument to persistence. Its bones were rusted steel, patched by scavenged Dominion plating. Its core thrummed with hybrid technology stolen from countless raids. Weapons were hidden beneath broken panels, shields stitched together from fragments that should never have worked in harmony. Yet in the human's hands, it became more than a machine. It became a predator, an extension of will and vengeance, forged in silence and solitude. The Dominion could not comprehend this, and that was their downfall. They believed war was measured in fleets and firepower, but the human knew it was measured in resolve. And resolve had already claimed its toll. In the last engagement, 10 more ships had fallen to ambushes, mines, and traps so intricately planned that even Dominion tacticians struggled to explain them. Losses piled high, and with them, cracks began to show. Officers bickered over strategy, soldiers muttered about legends, and morale decayed like rust eating through steel. The admiral, proud and unyielding, sought to quell the unrest with iron discipline. His voice filled the halls of his flagship, commanding obedience, demanding sacrifice. Yet even he could not shake the gnawing truth. Every maneuver was anticipated, every strategy countered. The human was not reacting to his fleet. They were guiding it, herding it into positions where survival became impossible. He was not fighting an enemy, he was fighting inevitability. Still, the humans' war was not without its cost. Alone in the silence of their ship, they felt the toll of solitude pressing against their thoughts. Ghosts lingered in the corridors, faces of comrades who had fallen, echoes of voices silenced forever. There were moments, brief but sharp, when they wondered whether their defiance was vengeance or madness. Yet each time hesitation clawed at them, they looked to the stars and remembered humanity's last screams. That memory turned doubt into fire, and the fire drove them forward. The Dominion fleet, bloodied but not broken, began to alter its strategy. They deployed a dreadnought, a leviathan among their vessels, bristling with weapons and cloaked in reinforced armor. Its purpose was clear: to crush the human with overwhelming force, to end the whispers of fear spreading through the ranks. It lurked at the edge of the field, baiting the human into an engagement that would allow the full fleet to close in. The admiral believed he had finally outsmarted his elusive foe. The dreadnought was too powerful to ambush, too well-guarded to destroy. If the human attacked, they would be trapped. If they retreated, the fleet would chase them down. It was a strategy meant not for victory but for humiliation, designed to show the galaxy that the Dominion could still break legends. From within their ship, the humans studied the dreadnought with unblinking eyes. Its engines glowed like suns, its shields pulsed with layered defenses, and its weapons spread across every spectrum of destruction. To most, it would have seemed unstoppable. But the human did not see invincibility. They saw patterns, flaws hidden beneath arrogance. The Dominion had built it to intimidate, not to adapt, and intimidation was a poor shield against those who did not fear. They leaned back in their chair, mind racing faster than the consoles could track, already envisioning the steps ahead. This would not be a battle fought in desperation, but in design. The dreadnought was not a threat. It was an opportunity, the keystone upon which the Dominion's pride balanced. Break it, and the fleet would unravel. Break it, and the whispers would turn into terror. The admiral, unaware of how much of his mind the human had already mapped, issued the final order to his fleet. Formation closed around the dreadnought, nets of mines and patrols stretching outward like a trap waiting to spring. The soldiers cheered, some with genuine belief, others with trembling voices. The stage was set, and the admiral smiled for the first time in days. In the shadows, the human whispered into the silence, their voice steady, almost calm. "You think you've trapped me." Their hand rested on the console, ready to ignite a plan woven from patience and ruthlessness. "But you've only trapped yourselves." The void held its breath. The dreadnought waited, the fleet coiled in readiness, and the human's ship pulsed faintly in the darkness. The battle that followed would decide more than survival. It would decide whether the Dominion's pride endured, or shattered beneath the defiance of one who refused to die.